Welcome to Finlos Loves. This is the final part of the conversation that Eva and I had about toxic masculinity. In the first two parts, we addressed different ways that toxic masculinity can show up in relationships, how it is transmitted across generations, and what each of us can do to recognize and challenge it. Like all harmful behaviors, positive change cannot be made by the work of the recipients of harm alone. It requires reflection, growth, and ultimately the voices and energy of those who benefit from toxic masculinity to use their access, safety, and privilege to fight for permanent change. As we wrap up our conversation, we'll first close out our examination of how toxic masculinity affects people in the workplace. Then we will discuss the recently released Barbie movie, directed and co-written by Greta Gerwig and starring Margot Robbie.
Yeah, I was actually the thing that comes to mind right now is how you were feeling a couple days ago.
When? I feel lots of ways.
Like I think it was about 2-3 days ago, you were having a particularly difficult time with some of the tasks at work.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't speaking directly to them at first, but as I kind of poked and prodded,
Mm-hmm.
You finally said, I feel really, and you didn't use the word inept. I think you used the word,
It was either inept or inadequate. I use those words a lot.
It was inadequate.
Yeah.
And you said that you said you just felt like it didn't play to your strengths and that it was hard.
And then it was, when you're faking, like you're making pretend in your profession, what's it called?
Yeah. I used that term. It was you had imposter syndrome.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was trying to validate that because I think that like when you start in a job that's like in your field but very different than what you did. Like so for me, for example, it was going from direct service to macro level work, which is definitely, it's like one level removed where you're supporting the supporters versus doing the supporting. And so it's kind of like teaching, but it's different. Mm-hmm. Definitely very different. I think one of the things they don't tell you is how much of it is just paperwork.
Yeah.
It's just paperwork and processes. And there's a huge learning curve, and I was ready for it. And I wouldn't say I was necessarily excited for it, but I was definitely ready for it and knew that it was coming. But even then, I think the first 2 years of doing the work, I was definitely in a very fake it till you'll make it like mindset, because I felt like I knew what I was doing, but inside I felt like crying. Like I was just like constantly like, I'm not good at this. Mm-hmm. And also it didn't help that, I was still very much in mom mode and breastfeeding. And here I was like going from being able to, freely breastfeed my kid, like, several times a day to all of a sudden like I'm traveling again. And, you start to feel like, so there's a hormonal shift there for sure, and like losing your milk and all of that. And so that's not to excuse and not to use the hormonal out. But definitely
it's real.
Yeah,
though.
it's real. And I felt like I was giving up a lot, and I didn't want to be giving up those things at all. But we were in a real financial bind at that point, and it felt like we had to, and then made me feel, I don't know, a sense of like unfairness in the world, that there are people who, who have children and hire nannies to take care of their children and go to work, and they'll talk to you much the same way that you talk. You'll talk about how difficult it is to have children and to be a working mom. And one day it dawns on you that, oh, wait a second. So, okay, this is a very different situation than my situation, and then there's like a huge sort of class-based divide between what you're doing and how you're doing it and how this other person's doing it. And, knowing that for them, and this is like the white feminism aspect of the conversation, right? That they're doing it that way because they feel like it. Like if they really wanted to tomorrow, they could quit their job and they'd still have enough money to be a stay-at-home parent. They just see their career as like an end-all, sort of like this is the pinnacle of what feminism is to me, is that I get to have a career and I get to be outside of the home. And for me, it's very much the opposite. Is I wish I could, and I think having conversations with my mom as an adult, I did ask her that question one day. I said, Mom, how come you never stayed home to parent us, like to be a stay-at-home mom? And I always thought it was a choice. I always kind of hated that she wasn't there, that she was constantly working. And I remember her saying, because I couldn't, because that wasn't an option. And I was kind of shocked. Like somehow it was a new realization in some ways, because I thought that maybe she had the option, at least when we were younger, but she never had. And I think that that's probably one of the most difficult parts about Barbie for me, the Barbie movie.
The Barbie movie.
If you want to dig into that.
Sure, let's do it. You were saying it's one of the hardest parts. What is it?
The white feminism aspect of the movie. That, so Barbie is sort of the quintessential example of toxic femininity. As we've been talking about it, there was personally a lot of joy for me, and these are spoilers, spoiler alert. There was personally a lot of joy for me in the scene where Sasha, who's like, she comes across as a middle schooler. I think she's probably a middle schooler. She's the young girl, rips Barbie a new one.
Mm-hmm. I loved it. What you described yesterday, she's like the Barbie. Well, how are you saying that the Bobby. Barbie is the quintessential Karen.
Yes, yeah.
And she just walks in and expects you to stop.
Oh, yes.
And listen and pay deference and heed her words. Yeah. Yeah,
like she's just here like, oh, hey, I'm here to save the day. And it's just like, and she's like, save the day, you're what's wrong with the world. Like, and so, it was an interesting feeling, because as a part of the audience, I knew that the movie was trying to manipulate me into feeling a sense of empathy and hurt for the Barbie character, because she is that fucking naive. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of want to be like, oh, you're just like a baby, But then I remember that that's actually what white feminists look like in our society, that they show up exactly like that. They show up not knowing anything, but thinking that they know everything, and hoping and expecting for you to hold their hand through the process while and then when they realize that doesn't work, that they were wrong about it all, come the tears. And, as she kind of walks away in tears, and it was like, yep. That's what that looks like.
Yeah, to use an analogy, or it's when you're on a boat and you're in the canal or the river that's leading to the ocean, like there's signs that say no wake, right? Don't rev your engine, don't cause waves. And you're describing a person who does not realize how much wake they're like the destruction that they're causing by seemingly wanting to do good. They pay absolutely no attention to the wake that they're causing, the mass destruction on either side, because they're driving their big fucking yacht in this tiny little river, and their wake is just rolling everybody over. And I love it. She calls her a fascist.
I love it. Oh my God. Yes. I was so proud of that little girl, because, I think that there are times that I get really scared about the ways that my that our girls show up in the world, like they're very self-confident. They're very like, they're very funny. Oh my God, they're funny.
And they're manipulating us as an audience member to not like this girl because she's introduced by like pushing her mom away.
Yes.
By don't touch me, mom. All of these things. We're like, oh my God, this girl.
Yeah.
But then she's on it and she is sharp and she's like, no.
And she's independent.
Yeah. And everything about you is wrong and harmful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and so I think I was, I was thinking a lot about the girls because this little girl dresses a lot like her girls dress. Like they dress for comfort. So they're wearing, doesn't pluck her eyebrows, which I loved, and isn't wearing much makeup and is wearing a t-shirt and like,
hoodies and jeans.
Hoodies, jeans. Like it just really, really comfortable and doesn't care. She's hanging out with her girlfriends, no boy in sight, and so I started to think about this. I'm like, so who in our society has, well, first of all, what is an existential crisis? Right? And
because this is the premise of the whole movie is that Barbie's having
an existential crisis.
Existential crisis.
Right. And then on top of that, like, and then who has the privilege to indulge at an individual level in these existential crises versus on the collective level? Because we should all be having collective existential crises right now.
All the time.
And that should include, why the hell are we sitting in a movie theater watching this garbage? It shouldn't on some level, right? But on the other hand, you're like, oh man, the world's falling apart. Might as well, watch something kind of silly to entertain myself. And like, and there were aspects of the movie that were funny and and I think that my favorite part, I think, is when I told the kids, like, they were like, let's dress up, and I love dressing up. So I was like, yes, let's dress up, the
celebratory aspect.
Yeah, the celebratory aspect of it, of like just going out, of like imagining, what kind of, like, if you were going to dress up as a doll, really, because that's what happens, right? It's like we're taught how to dress up dolls so that we know how to dress ourselves, so that we know how to dress our children, etc. And so, but that's what got to me, is that even this, I think questions of death are big and important, and I love that. Like, I love that that a part of the question was like, am I ever going to die? Like, because yes, we're all going to die, actually. But it was interesting, right? Because it's I, me, and there isn't this idea of like, what about everybody else? And so in that moment, like, it isn't about anybody else. And even when she steps into the real world, it's about finding who's handling her, who's playing with her, so that she could write things for herself. And like that's without even touching on like the fact that it claims to be like Barbie is supposed to be every woman, right? And so then we have like, plus size Barbies and like curvy Barbies and all of this. But the thing that really freaking mobilizes her to leave Barbie Land is cellulite. Okay? Yeah. So, I mean, talk about endorsing fat phobia, and so, we must stop cellulite, the battle cry for embracing Birkenstocks. I was just like, I've been wearing Birkenstocks, like, for as long as I've been able to afford them, basically. Right. And before that, it was like, still sandals, but like, cheap sandals. And, for me, cellulite has been a reality since I was 14. Okay, not because I was fat, but because I have thighs, because my body's built differently. And so, I went to see the movie because my therapist said that I should see the movie, and she said that she cried several times during the movie. And I think there were definitely some parts that I think tugged at you, for sure. But I did leave the movie with this thought of like, okay, why does she want me to see this? Just kind of like, okay, this was like, at best, it was like, feminism 101, but it was definitely white feminism. you know, and definitely like the idea of like cellulite, it really, you know, really sat heavy with me because it was just like, yeah, you know,
That's the thing to be scared of. Right.
I have always had cellulite. So if that, then I was fucked from the beginning. Like if that was the thing that, you know, and if, you know, not wearing heels, like then, you know, also, you know, I've chosen not to my whole life.
And I've been reading, I mean, I read a lot of reviews and stuff like that for fun. And I've read so many reviews about how progressive the film is, how risky it was for this movie to be made.
Okay.
And why Ken, and the main Ken in the movie, I can't remember the actor's name right now off the top of my head, but the main Ken, why he is suddenly like the new role model for boyfriends or partners because he and so I'm watching the movie with these critiques in mind, like and it, as you said, it is like basic feminism at best. It's important stuff, like the speech that the mom gives is true, and it is profound, and it is the speech that every woman experiences in their mind.
It's the Madonna whore complex.
All like the yes, I have to be strong but not too strong. I have to be direct but not make people feel uncomfortable. All of that, like that is literally every woman's experience. So it's true and it needs to be said, but it's not that profound in the sense that like if you need the Barbie movie to explain that to you, then we've got bigger problems.
Well, and I wondered about that. Yeah, I wondered if like because I didn't want to toss it out as like, you know, I think there's momentum to maybe have these conversations with people who haven't bridged those gaps yet. But yes, that's problematic, right? Like if we have people who are still needing to have this level of simplicity explained to them, that's problematic.
Well, because you have people who are fairly well educated who are like, we get this. This is, I agree with you 100% on board. But then you have the opposite end where they're coming out of this movie like, this movie is an attack on traditional family values. This movie is an attack on masculinity and men. And this is a movie designed to make men feel bad about themselves. So it's like, you're not going to get those people anyways.
Yes.
So who the target audience of this movie is, I don't know. And so it's just interesting. But the thing that I was really struck by as I was watching the entire movie is why are so many, and these are women writers, why are so many women film critics praising this portrayal of Ken? And the big spoiler is that Ken becomes the villain of the movie.
Yeah.
And not only does he become the villain, the Barbie to Margot Robbie, who's the actor who plays Barbie, to her credit, like the role itself ain't that deep, but she does some pretty spectacular emotional work, right? Yeah. Like I think that she embodies that role, the emotional range. Yes. Like she did an amazing job, but it hurt me. It hurt me when after Ken adopts patriarchy as his rallying cry and takes over Barbie Land, and all of the Barbies have to like fight against the rule of the Kens. Yeah. That then at the end Barbie has to fucking apologize to him? Yeah. For making him feel bad? Yeah, because like, that hurt me. Yeah. That hurt me. And then you know what he did? He did the thing. Yeah. He did the thing where not only does she, so the sequence is the Barbies take back over. Great. Yeah, we're happy. Ken is in the midst of his crisis because all he ever wanted was for Barbie to look at him and love him. Yeah. To give him that attention.
The validation, the attention, yeah.
And she said, I'm sorry that I always pushed you away. Not every night had to be girls' night. Okay. you know what? I'm willing to at least say, wow, she's super kind and super generous and does the work that every kind woman does.
Yeah.
But then he does the thing that toxic masculine men do, was he receives his and all, like, the graceful apology, and then he faux commits suicide, and he goes super dramatic, so that it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And then she goes to give him a hug, and he goes to try to make out with her. Like, he just keeps pushing. He just keeps pushing. And I was sickened by it. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And I think that any positive message, any pro-woman, any feminist message that could be drawn from that film is just destroyed by how Barbie has to ultimately be so gentle with fragile Ken.
Yeah.
And with his little "I'm Kenuff."
Oh God. Well, and then that was all his own thinking, right? Like he came up with that all on his own. Like, it's like she didn't do any work at all to help him realize that maybe he just needs to be him, right? Because he basically coins the term Kenuff, you know. So it's like he's Kenuff, but like where did that idea really originate?
It came from her boundaries, and her enforcing her boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah. It was just gross.
Well, and I guess that's the point, is that, like, to begin with, it was an enforcement of boundaries where he felt entitled to have access to her, and she was like, no thanks, like, I don't want to do that. So it does suck that in the end she and that is something we do too much of, right? Apologizing is definitely a toxic feminine trait that is really, really hard to break. I struggle with that. And then
I think another, I would argue as a toxic masculine trait, because I've been guilty of doing it, so I'm just going to assume that most men probably do, is this adherence to, like, the meaning of words.
Yeah.
Because he's like, it's Barbie and Ken.
Yes.
It's Barbie and Ken.
Oh, I hate that.
And then he's like, it's the way it's supposed to be. It's the way I made it. It's Barbie. And then she's like, what if it's Barbie and it's Ken? Like, that one word all of a sudden, boom, makes all of the difference. It's like, really, like, you're really going to stick to that, to the meaning of words. That's been your problem this whole time.
Yeah.
If only they had put it's in front of your name, that would have made everything all better. Yeah.
Yeah, to make you a separate whole individual. Oh. Yeah, and and I think that's really interesting, because the concept, to go back to the Madonna horror complex from the perspective of Freud, is that the reason that men then lose interest in wife-like people is that they become too much like their own mothers. And obviously you don't want to have sex with your own mom, right? Unless you're Oedipus. But, like, even then you don't want to. But it happens by mistake.
It happens.
Yeah. So there was this quote I read, and I meant to write down the name of the person who wrote it, and I want to say it was definitely from Scalawag magazine, but it was, we laughed because seeing our lives played out of toys with limited seeing our lives played out from, like, lip by, right, toys with limited vocabulary and reason, we can't make up excuses for the core of our evil. So the idea of watching Ken and Barbie play out aspects of our actual reality, it seems really bizarre to think that it's actually real.
It's totally real.
But it is real.
Yeah. He is constant, and I'm trying to, in my mind, I'm just thinking all of the moments when he boundary pushes. Yep. When he's like, let me sit up front with you, and she has to be like, no, you stay in the back. Yes. And he's like, Barbie, look at me. I'm gonna go do this thing. And so he forces her to stop and pay attention. Yeah. And then when they do get to the real world and they're sitting on the bench, and she's like, I need space to think, and he walks away, but he's like, constantly looking at her.
Looking at her,
just
yeah.
waiting for her to look back at him. And I think that I can't say it was a total waste of time because it did sort of give me words to express an aspect of toxic masculinity that I think is very true, and I think that the movie displays painfully perfectly and says is when he says, so I don't remember so this is paraphrased, but he says, I only liked patriarchy because I thought it was about horses. And once I realized it wasn't just about horses, I got bored or I got tired of it, because ultimately what patriarchy as an expression of toxic masculinity is about enforcing the ability for men to have fun, to have free time, and to play. And whatever that play gets expressed as, is it an expression of competitiveness and competition? Is it expressed as a desire for sexual conquest? Is it a desire for the time, which is the ultimate privilege, to have hobbies and to do things that you want to do?
Yes.
That while wifey stays at home with the kids, like that's what it's about. And the moment that he realized that, to be in charge means I have to do work, and it means that I have to think. Like all I wanted to do was sit in my Casa Bro house and dojo Casa house,
Ken's dojo Casa house, whatever.
All I wanted to do was sit and ride horses.
Yeah,
like once it became work, it was not fun anymore. That is ultimately, I think, what patriarchy and toxic masculinity about, is enforcing the status quo so that men have that privilege of time and play.
Right. And white women get that as long as they're not married.
Right. Or as long as they're willing to accept.
Or as long as they
role.
have a nanny.
Right.
Like to take care of the kids that they end up having. Yeah. And so I think that's part of what was maybe problematic for me with the movie, is that you had like the two real women in the movie, Sasha and the America Ferrera character, whose name I can't remember at the moment, are both Latina women. And so like you have these women who are relegated to providing the labor for this
the emotional
perfect the emotional support for this perfect like white stereotypical Barbie. And it's just problematic.
And of course the brown woman will be playing with a white doll.
Yes. Yeah, of course. And then there is an abolitionist writer named Eteng Atta, who also points out that there's also commentary on the carceral state, because in this they are arrested twice.
Yep.
Once for battery. For physical battery.
Yeah.
Because she punches one of the construction workers.
Yeah, she died. Which
first of all, I don't think that a construction worker would ever have actually reported that, because it would be personally embarrassing.
Yeah, it would be emasculating.
Yeah, it would be emasculating, and so the fact that it gets reported is interesting, like as a plot line. And then for stealing, and so in that both times, like it's a show, right? Because it's like this totally ridiculous situation with these characters, but nothing comes of it. Like I don't think there's any bond.
I 100% agree that it is commentary on the carceral state, because both these beautiful white people they're set free. Yeah. They're booked, they're fingerprinted, and they're set free.
And the police are making comments, I think, about her appearance.
And so that is the other commentary, which I think is the movie focuses on more, is how objectified she is.
Yes.
It's happening to her, but the fact that she literally says, we were arrested twice today, and yet she's out free walking around.
Yes.
No consequence.
Exactly.
At all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it plays with this idea of there being diversity in the movie, because there are people of different colors and of different like cultural backgrounds, but it's still a very white movie.
Yeah. The people with the power, Barbie and Ken, are still very much white. All of the backup Kens are all minorities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess like that last bit is like the idea of weaponizing femininity, and how not good that felt for me to watch play out on screen, because I think even those behaviors, they were endorsed by the movie. The idea of like, okay, cool, like we know what their weaknesses are, so let's just exploit them. And so it was the idea of playing into the more horror part of the Madonna horror complex, where we actually like weaponize sexuality and trick men into doing what we want them to do.
Yeah.
And then turn them against each other.
Yep.
And those are skills that unfortunately girls are taught very young kids. Like we're taught that, you know, men are kind of dumb and they don't really know what they want anyway. And so that, you know, I remember my mom saying on more than one occasion that she loved, I know it's a movie quote as well, but the idea that there are no rules in love or war. Like she would say that a lot. And part of the way that she thought that this played out is that if you wanted to be in relationship with people, that the best way to do that is to pretend that you weren't interested in them and to ignore them and to make them jealous by paying attention to other people. And I saw that played on the screen and it was very cringy. You know, but it was cringy because it's true. And so again, there's that whole like idea of like we're playing with dolls, but really the doll play is actually our reality.
Yep.
And because that's what kids do, right? Kids don't just operate in a vacuum. They play out, and that's why play therapy is a thing.
Yep.
You know, watching kids play tells us the things that they're struggling with. And so it's it's about adults playing at dolls.
And ultimately, the reality is reflected in the movie too, where you have the very real consequence of a man who has rejected his right to Barbie's body.
Yep.
He retaliates violently, politically, physically, literally steals her house.
Right.
And he then ends the movie with zero consequence.
Yep.
He realizes the consequence that he has is that he still gets Barbie as a friend. He realized that he didn't want the power anyways because it was too much work, so he gets to just go back to being
chill. Yeah.
Go chill on the beach. He gets to go beach some more. And I did the running gag of I'm gonna beat you off. Like,
oh god,
that got me.
Yes,
that got me.
That was funny.
I'm gonna beat you off. No, I'm gonna beat you.
Well, it's like the homoerotic aspect of that.
That was good. But there's no consequences for any of the men.
Yeah.
And the consequence for Barbie developing actual complex emotions is that she has to she gets the burden of being an actual human being.
Yeah.
And all the consequences that come with that, which obviously the intent of the movie is to say that's a good thing because she gets to experience the full range of emotions, but it's a really confusing message. Like, nobody, like, I mean, I've said it all. I think Ken has no consequence.
Yeah, and I don't think she ever, you know, I obviously, like, she has some concept of how bad what I hate for her, and that we don't really talk openly about, and that, you know, I think at the end you're left with this like, oh, she's gonna be a girl boss, and like, yes, like she's going to her interview, but it turns out she's at the gynecologist. And so I don't know if that was meant to really impress upon us like, oh, she's truly human now. But for me, the heaviness of it came from exactly what we talked about earlier today, that means your body is now rapeable. Your body is now a body that is quite literally in danger of more than just this stupid violence that was inflicted upon you in Barbie Land, right? Because the damage was in some ways minimal. It was yes, it was emotional. Yes, it was annoying. But the fix was relatively easy compared to these questions that you've been asking me about, well, how do we do something about this? What do we do next?
Well, because the premise of the film is that if everything in Barbie Land is just play anyways, it's all play.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for me, when she said that she's there to see her gynecologist, the realization is like, well, welcome to a world where Roe v. Wade's been overturned, and as long as you're willing to, to be okay with men in this world, which obviously you weren't the first time around. Otherwise, you're going to have it really tough here.
Yeah.
And that all the little flashback, the cameo of like the director, I guess, like the director like put together like this cameo of like flashbacks from children and people and like a lot of the people who were involved in the film, like these were actual real people from the people's lives, and it was beautiful. And at the same time, I'm like, okay, yeah, but this included only the positive things that can come out of life and none of the negatives. And like, is it truly a choice? Is it an embodied consensual choice to give her only the good stuff, none of the bad stuff that can happen here? And it really isn't. But, she's a doll. So
yeah. And that's I think the frustration is that, well, it's not a frustration. I think this is the responsibility of being decently aware of what's happening and having children that we want to have these conversations with, is that like, it's interesting and we need to be aware.
Yeah. And, I think the last bits of conversation around it really were zeroing in on just how much money Mattel spent on marketing for the movie and doing that at a time where, there are storytellers organizing to demand just wages.
Right.
And where it's like, why should you have to do that? When these things are making so much money, when they're spending so much money.
Yeah, the corporate synergy is troubling.
So it's interesting, and then I guess like climate crisis stuff too around a lot of these manufacturers and just the damage that they do overall. And so again, to that sentiment of like individual versus collective emphasis.
Yeah, it's all very consumer driven and consumerist. So ultimately, what do we say about Harry when Harry met Sally? Like,
they were able to be friends.
No, they weren't. They ultimately end up romantically together. The second that they made out, or they had sex, they broke up their friendship and they couldn't be friends. That's the whole point that the movie actually makes, is that Harry is right. For them, at least, they had to then not be friends for a whole whatever year, and then finally at the New Year's party, he's like, "I'm actually in love with you." There's no in between for them. Well, I guess there is, but the truth is that the whole time that they're friends, air quotes, they're secretly pining for each other, and they do want to be romantically involved, which still proves the point.
Yeah, I think that that the truth is complex. I think that I think that unfortunately a huge emphasis on romantic love is part of the problem, and maybe that is one thing that Barbie did right in that whole idea of like every night is girls' night, right? Is that we should value all of our relations equally, and those relations extend beyond even human relations, right? Like there are people for whom quite literally their dog is their best friend, and it's a non-human kinship. And
I think where that movie is a product of its time, and I say that unfortunately as a failing, is that it is a very simplistic look at what relationships can be.
Yeah.
Like you're either doomed to the friend zone, or you're having sex. Those are that ne'er the twain shall meet.
Right.
Which I think is unfortunate because there obviously is a whole range of types of relationships that are constantly in flow.
Yeah.
And also different experiences that people seek. Like people might want to be friends and have sex, but not have any romantic feelings.
Right.
Or
yes.
they might really like live and die for this person, but they just don't like whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like you said, it's complex.
Yeah. There are definitely, and that happens within marriages too, right? Where like you might be really well suited to run a house together, but not feel very romantic in the relationship, or so so that I think relationships can be what we make of them, and with no matter what the gender is, but I think that we do fall into these pits around doing harm in the way that we engage, and particularly when we've bought into these systems and don't know how to do our own work, when we don't feel enough. Yes, we don't feel enough.
I hate Ken.
I personally, I thought about going as Ken to the movie too, but had more femwear than mask wear.
You rocked it though.
I did rock it. I did.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, but I think if I were to do it over, I could probably, but it almost makes you not want to because the Kens were so awful.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't talk about Alan, and we didn't talk about the other Kens, the one, the Kens that
all
weird Barbies,
all the queer Kens,
the queer coded,
the queer Kens.
Right. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, so what if maybe maybe the Barbies were lesbians and they just weren't interested.
Yeah.
And the Kens, and that's why.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a lot of interesting things that they could have explored.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, it's fine. It just wasn't that deep.
Yeah. It was sold as like the reason that she was not interested in Ken was because she wanted to be an independent woman, as opposed to for any other reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode and series about toxic masculinity. I want to thank Eva for giving their time, energy, and expertise to this conversation. We hope that you enjoyed it and encourage you to engage with us. Make comments, ask questions, make suggestions, and we will be sure to feature them in upcoming episodes. You can find us on social media, send emails to finlos@finloslives.com, or leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app embedded at finloslives.com. If you appreciate this episode or any of the Finlos Lives content, I hope you'll subscribe to the show and share it. I look forward to our next conversation.
Signing off.
Bye.